powered by J-Proof, which is powered and backed by resentment and backed by an army. You know, we've discussed this on lives earlier today, and we've discussed this ad nauseum yesterday and every year before, but on Monday, it was Memorial Day. And this is a day in which the American people are supposed to just stop for a second, take a pause, and remember those who have given their lives in service to this country. And so traditionally on Memorial Day, politicians and so-called public servants attend memorials. They march in parades, they take part in public festivities in Washington, D.C., the entire time trying to position themselves as great patriots, great supporters, great champions of the American people. But that was then. That was then, and this is now. And now the mask is just all the way off. Everybody knows that whether they're elected or appointed, whether they're a part of some bureaucracy, whether it's nepotism or something else completely, whether it's blackmail or bribery, the people that are running this government, they don't care about Americans. They're not serving you, they're not protecting your children, and they're not serving the American people. They're not sending America's military to war on behalf of America. And they just don't care who knows it at this point. They're proud of it. Because these traitors, these demons in our occupied government, they're serving Israel. They're serving the Jews, and they're sending Americans to go and die on their behalf. They've been doing it now for decades. And even as the people have started noticing, they've just ramped up their efforts. They've ramped up their loyalty and service to Israel. They're just doubling down on their betrayal of the American people. And so naturally, Memorial Day 2025 was the most occupied Memorial Day in American history. And even worse, this Memorial Day, some of the highest ranking members of the federal government left in America traveled to Israel, met with Benjamin Netanyahu, the war criminal who has active warrants by the ICC to address the Israeli government and the Israeli demon people while ignoring Memorial Day back at home, while spitting in the face of those that they sent to go and die for this country. It's disgusting. And it's important to note that in this case, as always is the case, this was a bipartisan group of traitors meeting with their overlords. How about this Republican, Mike Lawler? Republican Michael LaCall, alongside Democrat Sheila McCormick, all cuddled up with Bibi Netanyahu. Look at that. I mean, it looks like Mike Lawler is trying to hold Bibi's hand. This is a blatant slap in the face, a spit in the face of the American people and our ancestors who gave their lives to establish and hold on to this country. A spit in the face of all of the American people who, with pure intentions in their hearts, joined our military, went to war, only to be used as pawns and cannon fodder to serve the Jew, to serve the banker, to serve Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, to serve Boeing, to serve all of the NGOs and contractors that'll be deployed for nation rebuilding, to participate in a Jewish bloodletting ritual. And look, these members of Congress, they weren't the only ones that were hanging around in Jerusalem or spending Memorial Day with perverts in Tel Aviv. Check out this video clip. This is Kristi Noem, the skanky Secretary of Homeland Security. Homeland Security, also spending Memorial Day in Israel, speaking at an event and using our Memorial Day to drive home the official narrative regarding the false flag shooting of Israeli diplomats in D.C. She even referred to the Israelis as us. Watch this.
Following the horrific terrorist attacks in Washington, D.C. that took the lives of Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lynchinsky, President Trump asked me to come here to Israel, to stand with all of you and to honor Sarah and Yaron. Today we stand together with profound grief, and our hearts are heavy with the loss of these two radiant souls that we will no longer have with us. Their lives were so full of promise and love and dedication, and may they be an inspiration to us of how to live our daily lives as well. They were people who recognized they were created to serve others, and they did that in a way to take straight on the face of other people that seek to divide us and that hate us. Yet in this moment of sorrow, we also ask that you would gather with us to honor their light and the unbreakable spirit of the Israeli and the American people.
Yeah, us. She let it slip. She tried to correct herself, but we all heard what she had to say. I mean, after all, this is the woman who banned the gospel and criminalized noticing in South Dakota. Now she's working to do so on a national scale. Instead of chasing down illegal invaders, her Department of Homeland Security is chasing down noticers, chasing down people who ask too many questions about the baby penis in Israel and their agents in America. And by the way, that congresswoman from the picture that I just showed all of you, Mike Lawler, he's the one who introduced the Anti-IGO Boycott Act, which will throw Americans in prison for 20 years and fine them $1 million for the crime of boycotting Israel. That legislation stalled in Congress, and obviously he's in Jerusalem getting further instructions right now. These people don't give a about America. They're traitors. They don't care about the Americans whom they've sent to die for over 2 decades in the Middle East and for decades before that. Dating all the way back to Desert Storm, dating back to Vietnam. Yeah, according to a report published on X by our friend Sam Parker, the Vietnam War, like so many others mass death events, was a Jewish plot. Sure, we all know the story of Henry the Jew Kissinger. We know that after the Jews killed Kennedy, the American presence in Vietnam absolutely exploded, but Sam says there's even more to it than that. So we want to talk to him more about that. To that end, he joins us now on the day that we're learning that I've been banned from the VFW. I'm not allowed to go there and honor these veterans or talk about their story and how in an act of war, an international war crime, that this boat was torpedoed, that it was napalmed, that it was strafed, and that the lifeboats that these sailors climbed aboard to flee for their lives as they watched 34 of their brothers get cut to pieces and 170 others wounded were strafed by machine gun fire by the Israeli Air Force. Not allowed to go talk about that at the VFW. Anyway, tell us about Vietnam and your discoveries.
Yeah, Stu, I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, so there's so much to unpack here, so I'll try to hit the high points for people. But listen, I want people to keep in mind the Ukraine-Russia war, right? That's not being fought for American interests, okay? And then we had the war on terror, this 20-plus year-long odyssey in the Middle East, where, you know, countless trillions of American blood and treasure have been spilt on fighting wars for Israel in the Middle East. And then, of course, you have this Ukraine-Russia war being led on the Ukraine side by Vladimir Zelensky, this Ukrainian Jewish, actor, comedian, pervert.
Yeah, whatever. This Jew who never wears the ridiculously embarrassing tiny hat, by the way. What is he trying to hide?
Yeah, well, so what I want people to understand is, neither of these wars, the war on terror or the Russia-Ukraine is being fought for American interests. And it's the same with Vietnam. Similar to how the Ukraine-Russia war is really a proxy war between the United States and Russia, engineered by neocon Jews like Victoria Nuland and Antony Blinken. Okay, similar to that, that's what Vietnam was. Vietnam was a war for Israel engineered by 2 Russian Jews, Walt and Eugene Rostow, okay? Walt Rostow was the national security advisor for Lyndon Johnson, okay? And he literally is known as the architect of the Vietnam War, okay? And in fact, he had so much power in the Johnson administration that he got the nickname America's Rasputin. Okay. And Walt Rostow, he's the guy that under JFK recommended to JFK that he send military advisors and escalate the number of military advisors into Vietnam. He also issued a report saying that we should increase bombing in Vietnam and increase the military advisor presence in Vietnam. Okay. He convinced JFK to do that. All right. JFK later in October of 1963, after a year and a half or a couple years of this, said, he looked at casualty reports and he actually said, or he issued a memo in October of 1963 calling for the drawdown of American military advisors out of Vietnam and the total removal of American military presence out of Vietnam by 1965. That's the memo that he issued in 1963. And then on the day before he was assassinated, on November 21st, 1963, he told his assistant press secretary, Malcolm Kilduff, that Vietnam wasn't worth one more American life and we had no business there, and he intended to get us out of there. That's what he said the day before he was assassinated. Okay.
That's why they had another reason why they had to kill him.
Exactly. It's totally another reason. 5 days later, on November 26th, LBJ reversed that national security memo that JFK had drafted and replaced it with his own memo calling for a major escalation in Vietnam. And then we're off to the races. And you get, when it's all said and done, over 500,000 Americans go to Vietnam. 50,000 of them never come back. And we spend this whole, decade plus sojourn in Vietnam just wasting away American military blood and treasure again. And nobody even knows why, Stu. You ask people, why did we fight Vietnam? And nobody knows. And I'll tell you why nobody knows. Nobody knows the reason is because it wasn't for American interest. It was for Israel's interests. One of the big things that was happening in Vietnam was the American military industrial complex was getting beefed up. It was getting built up. If you go back and look at the United States defense spending after World War II, it dropped down to near $10 billion per year in the late 1940s. Only $10 billion per year. Then you get to the Vietnam era and it skyrockets to into the $70 and $80 billion per year. Okay, there's this massive military industrial complex. Okay, build up throughout the 60s and the 1970s. Well, what was this for? What was this build up for? Well, you go back and you look at the 6-day war that Israel launches against its Arab neighbors in 1967. It's the same war in which the USS Liberty attack occurred.
Yeah, the USS Liberty attack, no doubt, was to try to convince Americans that this was another reason why we had to take their side in the 6-day war with Egypt.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. But the point is that Israeli military victories in the 1967-day war and the 1973 Yom Kippur War hinged on an implicit American military guarantee, and not just the American military guarantee, but the actual delivery of American military armaments, offensive weaponry, military intelligence, artillery, tanks, F-4 Phantoms, all these types of things. In 1973, when Israel was pushed right to the wall by the Arab counterattack in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Golda Meir and Israel armed their nuclear weapons that they stole from the United States, by the way, in the 1960s, okay? And they blackmailed the Nixon administration and said, if you don't resupply us with, all of these military armaments, we're going to nuke everybody. That was the blackmail. It's called nuclear blackmail. It's in the Samson Option book by Seymour Hersh. You can go look it up. This actually happened. And what happens is Richard Nixon launches, at that point in time, the greatest airlift resupply in world history, and it's called Operation Nickelgrass. And they deliver over 22,000 tons of American military hardware to Israel to help them win that 1973 Yom Kippur War. And Stu, it wouldn't have been possible for America to do that without the buildup of the American military industrial complex that directly resulted from the Vietnam War. Okay.
That Eisenhower warned us about, of course, and we never heeded those warnings.
Eisenhower warned us about. And so, again, who was the major beneficiary of the Vietnam War? Was it America? How did we get any benefit from Vietnam? We didn't. Did Vietnam benefit from the Vietnam War? No, they didn't benefit either. Who benefited from the Vietnam War? Literally, Israel benefited from the Vietnam War. And if you look at who was running the Vietnam War, was Walt Rostow, the National Security Advisor, the architect of the war, America's Rasputin, and his brother, Eugene Rostow, who was the other Undersecretary of State. Both of these guys were Russian Jews. And we know the generational hatred these people have for Russia. So what is Vietnam at the end of the day? It was a proxy war between the United States and Russia being engineered by Russian Jewish precursor neocons, okay? And that's exactly the same thing that was going on in the war on terror and this Ukraine-Russia war. This Ukraine-Russia war is a proxy war of the United States versus Russia, okay? Same thing, same deal, okay? And what both of these wars served to do was to create space in the Middle East for Israel to operate and to make its moves. This
has been the case with every single war that we have fought ever since. The Rothschilds fund both sides of it. Who else is involved? Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, the DC Beltway, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. It's the power bottoms like Lindsey Graham, who constantly cheer on and egg on war. He's doing it right now with Iran. I mean, everybody around Donald Trump is clamoring for war with Iran. Do you